News of wars and global conflicts dominate headlines.
Explosions rocked multiple cities.
Sudan's civil war.
The war in Ukraine.
But there's another war happening right now that affects you far more directly. It's a war on your privacy, and it's not being fought with weapons or armies, but with laws, surveillance, and the technology you use every day.
A lot of civil liberties, a lot of individual freedoms are disappearing, and the front lines are all the digital space.
From age verification laws to mass surveillance cameras to government access of your personal data, this isn't hypothetical anymore. It's already happening. So if that's the case, we have the choice to either surrender our rights away or do whatever we can to retain them.
There are 3 ways you can ever fight things.
At this point, it's tempting to think that this is just a problem in one country. Maybe stricter laws in the EU or overreach in the US, but that's not how this works anymore. As Naomi Brockwell, a tech journalist and online privacy advocate, explains, the internet doesn't operate within borders, and neither does surveillance.
We are using services that are dealing with, hundreds of jurisdictions at a time. Our data is being ping-ponged all across the globe. I do think that this is more of a global fight than we've ever seen.
Basically, this means that what one government does, even if it's on the opposite side of the world from you, it sets precedent. It creates pressure. That's why chat control, a piece of legislation in the EU that would have forced a backdoor into encryption, it still matters to people outside of Europe. This is why the way that China censors and controls its internet, even if you're not physically in China, it affects you. Because when you start to normalize local policies on a global internet, they start showing up everywhere else.
A lot of this control that is being pushed onto the internet, it is a global matter.
And that's what makes this different than anything we've seen before. This isn't just about one bad law or one bad actor. It's about a global shift in how governments view your data and who they think should have access to it. So let's take a step back for a moment, because at least in places like the United States, the government is supposed to serve and protect the people, not surveil and control them. There's supposed to be guardrails, legal protections that limit their power. And one of the most important of those protections is the 4th Amendment. That's the one that talks about unreasonable searches and seizures.
When America was first founded, you had a situation where there was tremendous abuse of power. You had the king saying, if anyone embarrasses the crown or is critical of the crown, you can go to their homes, rifle through their things, try to find something to pin on them, and then we will punish them.
That's exactly what the founders were trying to prevent. Unrestricted searches, unchecked authority, and a government that could investigate anybody they wanted to without cause. So they created a simple standard. If the government wants to search your private life, they need to get a warrant. That means probable cause, judicial oversight, and clear limits on what they're allowed to access. But all of this was designed long before the internet was born. And in today's digital world, a lot of what we would consider private doesn't neatly fall under these protections anymore. And this is where you need to understand something called the third-party doctrine. It's a legal principle in the US constitutional law where the courts have said that you may lose a reasonable expectation of privacy when you voluntarily share your data with a third party. Originally, this was established in the 1970s to say that bank records, things like checks and deposit slips, or even phone numbers dialed with a phone company, could be accessed by the government without a warrant. But 50 years later, the world has changed.
In an age of the internet, every single thing we do relies on a third party. And so it means everything in our lives is now subject to government intrusion.
Think about it. Your photos, your messages, your search queries, your AI prompts, even who you spend time with, most of that data, it isn't stored on your own devices. It's stored on servers owned by other companies. And because of that, the government often doesn't need to search you directly. They can just get the data another way. Sometimes they request it, sometimes they subpoena it, and in many cases, agencies simply purchase access to data that would otherwise require a warrant.
There are government agencies buying huge troves of data from data brokers and searching them at will, intruding into people's lives without any warrant or judicial oversight.
Which creates this strange reality because the protections that were designed to limit government power, they still exist. But the system has found these different ways around them. But what kind of data can they buy anyway? My email? My phone number?
Right now, we've got flock cameras all over the US. 80,000 was the last count, mapping, hundreds of millions of people in their everyday movement, putting together that comprehensive picture of everywhere people are going, with whom they're associating.
Flock cameras are those automated license plate readers that are being installed in neighborhoods and cities all across the United States, tens of thousands of them. Every time you drive past one, it logs your license plate, your location, the time, and that data can be stored, searched, and even shared. So now, without ever interacting with law enforcement, a detailed record of your movements can and often does exist. Or what about these age verification laws that you might have heard about? In multiple countries, and now increasingly in different US states, you're being required to upload a government ID or verify your identity in some other way just to access certain parts of the internet. Now, on the surface, it's framed as protecting children, and obviously we want to do that. There are certain things that they shouldn't see, but critics argue that it creates this system where your identity is tied to what you view, what you search, and what you read online. And that's not just regulation. That is a surveillance infrastructure in the making. And once that infrastructure exists, it rarely stays limited to its original purpose. Now, to be fair, most of these policies are introduced with good intentions, protecting children, stopping crime, improving public safety. The problem isn't the goal. It's what makes these systems possible. And then, of course, there are data brokers. These are companies that collect massive amounts of personal information and then package and sell that data, not just to advertisers, but to government agencies as well. Which means instead of needing a warrant, agencies can simply purchase access to information that would have otherwise been protected. So at this point, it's easy to feel like it's already gone too far, like the system is already built, the data's already been collected, and there's not much that we can actually do about it. But that's not entirely true, because there are still ways that we can push back.
There are 3 ways you can ever fight things. You could fight things through litigation, you can fight things through legislation, or you can fight things through technology.
The reason our privacy is continuously threatened isn't because there are no laws. It's because the current laws weren't designed for how data works today. Litigation is about challenging these practices in court, trying to force the system to recognize that these new forms of surveillance should still fall under the existing protections. Technology is what I talk about a lot on this channel, choosing tools that limit what data is collected in the first place. But the one that most people don't think about is legislation. Because right now, a lot of what's happening isn't technically illegal, it's just operating in the gaps. And that's exactly what Naomi is trying to fix with the Surveillance Accountability Act being introduced this week. Instead of creating some brand new framework, her approach is actually pretty simple. Restore the original standard.
If they're doing a search, meaning a meaningful investigation of someone or something, they should have a warrant. That's basically all the legislation does.
In other words, it doesn't matter whether the government is buying your data, requesting it, or even collecting it indirectly. If they're investigating you, they should have to go through the same process that's always been required: a warrant, probable cause, and judicial oversight. Now, contrary to what you might think, this kind of stuff doesn't limit law enforcement or even protect criminals. This should matter to you because privacy rights and protections, once they are removed, are almost impossible to rebuild. So what can you and I do? First, we can support this kind of legislation being introduced by Naomi and the Ludlow Institute. I'll link to more information on that below. You can remove your own data from these data brokers manually or with tools like Delete Me, which again, I'll link to below. And honestly, the best step is just paying attention, because most of this only works if no one is watching. You can defy the default and choose to make privacy a priority.
And if that choice is taken away, then they will slowly, descend into a state where they don't have the ability to ever push back or hold people to account.
A special thank you to Naomi Brockwell and her team for their contributions to this video. She has a great YouTube channel that you can watch here, and then check out this video next that YouTube apparently thinks you'll want to see.